If you are not aware about this, your voice agents will break sooner than you think. It's like one of those old rumors. Everyone's heard of it, but no one knows why it exists. I'm talking about Vapi's concurrency limit. Have you ever wondered why it's there or what it does? In this video, I will shed light onto this feature and tell you exactly what it does, what it is, how you can use it for your advantage, and I will also give you access to a couple of tools that will help you tremendously if you want to use and understand Vapi's concurrency limit in the first place. And if you don't know who I am, my name is Janis, I run an agency called Indig Ricus, and we help business owners create AI voice systems that helps you automate phone calls, increase the success rate of those calls, and make your employees happier. And not only that, but we actually help you make more money with the old data that you have that you probably don't use anyways anymore by reactivating those leads that you had in the past. This has been a massive success for us, and over the past couple of months we have implemented those AI systems from medium-sized businesses up to Fortune 500 companies. And as you can imagine, the bigger the company is, the more calls they usually have. And this is precisely why knowing about call concurrency is such an incredibly important topic. Imagine you're building a voice system and you implement it and it works actually well, but then you start getting traffic and things are getting blocked, calls are not going through anymore. You basically lose the most valuable thing right there, which is what you're trying to automate. So it's counterproductive if you don't know about this feature. This is for obvious reasons very bad, and to make sure this doesn't happen to you, let's start with the most basic question. What is the Vapi calling limit? Now, a couple of months ago, I have already made a video about the concurrency limit, but a lot of things have changed, which have been that tremendous that I believe we need a new video and I need to put in more details to help you understand this whole thing. And to make sure you really understand it, let's dive right over on my screen, because I have a Miro board prepared for you, which hopefully helps you to see the things visually a little bit better and get a better feeling of what happens step by step. Now, scrolling over here to the first slide, we can see the calling limit explained, which is a very basic graph, but you can simply imagine that you have a call that is connected to a phone number and that goes over to a line. So the way Vapi basically works is that account-wide, and this is very important to understand, based on your whole account, it limits the availability of lines to 10. Meaning that with any kind of number you have on your account, you can have a maximum of 10 concurrent calls. This means, for example, that when you call a lead list and you call 10 people at the same time, you cannot call an 11th, which is why you see here, for example, the X on the line 11, because you can try to make 11 calls, but from the 11th, they basically start failing once they're concurrent. This just means that at any given time, for your whole account, you can have a maximum of 10 calls at the same time. Now, the way I prepared this graphic is basically as a representation, having a single call as a line. So Vapi basically reserves always 10 lines for your account that you can use to make calls with. Back then, and this is why my old video is kind of outdated, back then you needed to jump on the enterprise plan because there was no other way of getting those concurrency limits set up for yourself and based on your needs. But this has changed now, which I'm going to show you as well in a couple of minutes. By the way, everything you're going to see inside of this video, which is going to be these graphs and also some really interesting tools that you definitely don't want to miss, so stay tuned. All of this will be available completely for free inside of my resource hub. So simply head over to hub.indigradicus.com. You will get access to all of those graphics completely for free. You can download them and follow me along on the screen if you'd like, or just check them out later on and use them for your own reference. But mainly it is important for the tools that are going to come, because they will really save you time and help you to either scope out your very own projects or maybe even your client projects if you're an agency and you sell those voice AI solutions. Now, in the next step, I would like to explain you a little bit more of the solutions that we have for this concurrency limits, because we can tackle this in a couple of different ways, which doesn't necessarily mean that you need to actually increase your call concurrency limit, because there are ways that you can overcome that, which I'm going to show you now. We are going to focus specifically on two solutions, which is obviously inbound and outbound. So both of them will be covered in this video, and I'll show you exactly how we tackle that inside of our agency so that you can literally just replicate this setup for yourself or for your clients. And to do that, let's head over to the very first use case, which is the outbound solution bundle. So it looks a little bit more complicated, but it actually isn't. So we have the same kind of setup here. We have basically a call, which means if you have an outbound solution, a lot of people, for example, do list calling, meaning you have a list or a campaign and you want to go through this list and basically call every single person and see if they pick up, and then have their voice AI speak to them, qualify them, get some KPIs out of it, maybe do cadence calling after that, etc. There are tons of ways of doing that, but basically having a list and calling through it, this is a very common use case that we see with outbound solutions, which is where this concurrency limit is probably the easiest one to be reached, because you can imagine you simply call 10 numbers and you already have completely filled your concurrency limit of those 10 calls, or those 10 lines basically. Now, to overcome this, we have implemented some various tactics, and one of them I'm going to show you here, and I'm also going to explain to you why we have done certain things so you understand it better. The main concept of this thing is that we basically bundle them up in separate bundles and call them at a given time. Now, let's imagine you have a Google Sheet or a list of 100 leads that you would like to call through. By just calling the first 10, you have already reached all of the existing lines. And to avoid this, we bundle this whole thing, as you can see here on the screen. we would usually just take the first 9 callers, call them in a bundle, so basically have all of them being called at the same time. And then we are pausing this whole thing for n minutes. N minutes, I'm going to explain you also in a second. And then we basically do the exact same thing with the next bundle. Now by looking at this, you probably have a couple of questions. The first one is probably going to be, why 9, not 10? Because we have 10 concurrent lines, so why should we only use 9 of them? And the next one, what is this pause for? Why can I not just call them right after? And the answers are very simple, and they're also mentioned over here if you have already looked at the screen. We are usually keeping 10% of all the concurrent lines that we have as a buffer, because you can imagine that when you run through a scenario like this, it might be that at some point people start calling back. So if you're always occupying all of your lines at the exact same time, those incoming calls would be lost because they can just not go through because you have literally no lines available. And because people are calling back, they are usually a lot higher value than all of the cold leads that you're trying to call or the leads that you have inside of your list. And it's most certain that not everyone picks up. You don't want to lose those warm leads that actually call back and try to see what happened after you call them. This is why a basic rule of thumb is that we currently reserve around 10% of the existing lines of this account for the incoming calls for outbound campaigns. Now for N, which stands for the average call length, you probably understand this whole thing now a little bit better. It basically just defines the length of the call. Let's for example say your average call length is around 3 minutes or 5 minutes. In that case, you would not like to have this whole thing shorter than 3 minutes. This pause, because otherwise you would run into the same issues. Imagine there's actually a bundle that has maybe 5 existing calls and they are running, and then you try to call the second bundle already while the first ones in the average are not over yet. This again would most likely cause that some of the calls are not going through because you don't have the lines available. Now with the 10%, we've seen a pretty good success rate with this. Obviously, this also depends on your lead quality and how active and warm they are. Because if you say you really just call them right after something, or you basically create this list and you list call them right after something happens, even in that case, they're probably super warm and they probably pick up. Now imagine, for example, your calls are going in an average. They're going really well for that specific bundle, and they might be even longer than the average. Even then, you would probably not be able to call some of those leads afterwards, which means you need to kind of reactivate them in a new bundle. So you can create logic that says, if a call fails, simply recall them again for the next bundle and just don't ignore them. This is one way that you can set it up by tracking it, for example, in a database, Airtable or Google Sheets, something like that. But that is something you need to keep in mind. So if you have a very warm lead set, I would probably set the number of minutes for the average call length on the higher end, so you don't lose any kind of calls that come through. Now with that out of the way, you should have now a proper understanding of the outbound solution, how you can basically do list calling. And if you literally just have a massive volume of calls, if you for example run Facebook ads and you pump out tons of budget for that and you get thousands of calls every single day, there is a different solution which we are going to approach now, which kind of goes together with the next thing that we are going to look into, which is the inbound call setup. But one more thing before we dive into this, right here I have also prepared you some formulas which just help you again to visualize the whole setup and what we basically calculate. I know that most people don't like formulas, but they are there because it makes it just easier for you to understand what happens behind the scenes. So we have the bundle size, and that equals the call concurrency limit as L times 0.9, which basically just breaks it down to 90%, or basically have a 10% buffer on top. And we kind of do the same thing for the average call length. And as you can see, we also have a 10% buffer on the average call length, just again to make it even less likely that any kind of calls roll over and aren't available. If you would like to know about the downsides, the only downside is that calling through your list takes a lot longer. This is just something you need to consider. But in our case, we value quality more than just calling massively and quickly through a list. Because obviously in the end, the goal is to get leads or to do something with those phone numbers and hopefully get someone on the phone that runs through your flow and actually gets value out of it, and not the opposite by just calling them. This is exactly why we have those buffers, and we believe they're really important, and we have seen good success rate with those. Now coming over to the next solution, which is the inbound solution. As you can see, there's not much difference to the initial set, or the basic version is that you need to just purchase new concurrent lines. Now, there are a couple of questions. How do you buy those concurrent lines in the first place? Why they are necessary? And actually, how many lines do you need to purchase for a certain setup? Because it's not that if you get 2,000 calls a day, you need to have 2,000 concurrent lines. There is some calculation happening, and no worries, I have an answer for all of them, for all of those questions, which I'm going to share with you in this video. Now let's get started with the first thing, which is how you can actually purchase those concurrent lines yourself. Because luckily, Vapi did some amazing changes to their very own dashboard, which now supports self-served concurrency lines and a couple of other features that you can actually directly access inside of your Vapi account in the billing section. Now the way it's done is you simply head into your Vapi dashboard, you go down here on your email address, you click here on billing, and you will end up on a page that looks something like this. Now, if you don't see the buy add-ons button, for example, you most likely haven't migrated your wallet setup, because what Vapi did is it changed from a monthly standard billing cycle to a credit-based setup, meaning that now you can just charge up your account, similar to what you do with OpenAI. You basically purchase credits and it will use it from the balance that you have on Vapi. Now, while in the first place this sounds a bit worse for you, because Vapi basically gets to keep some more money on their accounts on your behalf that you can obviously spend, but you need to put that money up front, which is not a favorable solution for many, but it has tons of other advantages, which I'm going to come to now, because this goes really well together with the add-ons and the way you do billing. Because for them and for you as well, for the accounting part, this is going to be a lot simpler. Now, if you haven't migrated yet, you will see a button up here, which allows you to basically migrate to the wallet-based setup, which then means that you will be able to put credits on Vapi and can use them as your billing. And once you've done that, you will see these three buttons where you can purchase credits, you can use a coupon, and you can buy add-ons. These two are kind of self-explanatory and we ignore them, but the buy add-ons is the one we actually want to look into, because we have some really cool options available right there. The first one is that we can have full HIPAA compliance, and that is not the HIPAA compliance that you have seen inside of the assistants, where you just remove the transcripts, etc. No, this is the full HIPAA compliance where you sign a BAA so that you can actually use the data and you have a direct contract with Vapi to make sure you are HIPAA compliant even while using those features. This is specifically interesting and relevant if you have medical patient data in there, for example, or other kind of sensitive data. Now, it comes at a cost, which you see down here as well, which is $1,000 a month. So for the bigger companies that deal with this sensitive data, this is definitely an important thing, and we can help you as well with the setup if you're curious. Now, another feature that you have is that you can enable Slack support, meaning that you will have a dedicated Slack channel with a Vapi team that helps you get guided through this whole Vapi setup and basically help you as well with questions for your voice AI agent. And the last one is the one that we are actually interested in, which is the call concurrency limit. And as you can see, for any kind of account, it is usually set to 10 as a default. And you can purchase extra lines for $10 per line per month. Now that means that if we, for example, want to increase the call concurrency to, let's say, 100 or around 100, you'll see that we are now at nearly $920 a month, which definitely goes up. And obviously, you would probably think, is that really necessary? Do I need to actually have 100 lines available? The answer is basically yes and no, because it depends on your setup, it depends on how many calls you do. And in the next step of this video, I'm going to show you as well how you calculate that and how you can calculate that easily using our resource hub and using that via formulas. Now, so before you buy anything, let's just head back to my Miro board right here. And we go over to the next question, which is how many lines do I actually need to purchase? Because now you know it's there, now you know you can upgrade them by yourself. But how much do you actually need for your case? Which means either for outbound or for inbound, depending on your traffic. And to make it a little bit easier, I have two ways here. One is a little bit more on the complex side, which is mostly just for like demonstrating it, or for anyone that loves math to basically just dive right into it and get this thing set up by yourself. Or another one is a shortcut that I'm going to show to you in a second. But let's first go over the formula right over here. So N basically just stands for the total number of calls that you do on a daily basis. The C is a concurrency limit, which is basically the 10 numbers or the 10 lines that you have available inside of your Vapi account. And H is basically the number of operating hours. And those operating hours are specific to you. That is something I cannot answer you without knowing your project. Let's, for example, say you're building a customer support agent that runs on your business and your business is open from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. You would usually have a 9-hour range where people can call you during those hours, or maybe call you afterwards, kind of depends. But for this example, let's say we call in business hours, so in those 9 hours. H would basically be 9, because this is the number of operating hours of your business on a single day. And lastly, we divide this whole thing by the average call duration, which is mentioned here as tau. So the average call duration is given as a percentage of the minutes in an hour. Now to get this better explained to you with an actual example, let's head over down here. You can see that the goal is basically to calculate the total number of calls that we can do on a certain day with the current concurrency limit that we have. And we do that by just filling in the blanks for those variables, and see the concurrency limit, we just leave it at 10. We multiply this whole thing by 9, which is the 9 operating hours, and we divide it by 5 minutes. So this is basically the equivalent of 5 minutes, and we get a total of 1,080 calls per day. Now, this is something we use in our agency. This might differ from your setup. This might differ from what Vapi uses. This is just what we have figured out for ourselves, which works. And this is what we are kind of using on a daily basis. And now imagine on a single day, you can have around 1,080 calls without running into any kind of concurrency issues. Obviously, this follows a couple of rules, meaning that the calls you're getting are equally spread so that they don't all come in at the same time. So they're spread out during the day, which means 1,080 is probably a good average. So it might be even that it is lower than that. If you have, for example, peak hours where the calls are coming in those peak hours is usually when you need to adjust it a little bit. But as an average, which I think is probably what serves most people here that understand and still watching this video, 1080 for 5 minutes is a good case. Now, if you don't want to calculate all of those things manually every single time with these formulas, I have something really awesome for you, and it is free, directly available inside of my resource hub, and it looks something like this, what you see right here on the screen. You simply head over to the tools section and you will see the call concurrency calculator, which is a small little tool that allows you to calculate those things visually directly inside of a resource hub without you using any kind of formulas. And I'm going to show you how easy it is. Now, you usually set a concurrency limit. This kind of depends on the concurrencies that you currently have, right? So let's say 10. Then you set the operating hours. This is what we discussed. So basically how many hours of a day you want the assistant to operate. Because if you call a lead list, for example, you don't want to have this lead list being called in the middle of the night, right? So you also limit that to a certain amount of time. So if it's not about operating hours, you limit it to the amount of time you want to call people in. And we have the average call duration, which also, again, depends on whatever you do. We have customers that literally have a call duration of 2 minutes for the actual really good calls. And we have some that are 15 minutes or longer. So it really depends on your use case. In my example, I'm just going to use a call duration of 3 minutes. And now once I press calculate, that we can have approximately 1,800 calls on a daily basis without reaching the concurrency limit. Now, 1,800 is probably, like I mentioned, an average. So it might be lower, it might be more, depends on your peak times, etc. But you can simply play around with this and see how many concurrent lines you need to get to a certain number. Because most people, they know that they have, for example, let's say 3,000 calls on a daily basis, or maybe 3,500. All you would do in this case is you would set the average call duration, let's set this to 5. And you see now if I calculate this, it's 1,080 calls per day. Now, which means, okay, we probably need like 30 lines. And then you will see, now we're at 3,240, which means if we go down, probably go to 3,132. So even this would probably be beneficial because you would still have some calls that would probably not overlap. So even this is something you can try for yourself. Now, I know this is a lot of information and I really hope this helps you understand this whole concept a little bit better and also clarify some extra issues that you had with the call concurrency limit, because we have seen it so many times inside of our agency and as well with clients that they don't really know what this actually means and they think they need to jump on an enterprise plan, which now luckily is not necessary anymore at all. And that's already the majority of things. However, I have one last thing for the ones that are still watching, a little goodie at the end that I think is really important for you to understand those things, because all what I mentioned now probably makes sense to you or hopefully makes sense to you, but there are some things that you might want to consider as well depending on your setup. Which brings us now to a couple of more aspects that I'm just sharing with you for everyone else that is still here. Now, the most important one from those is the time zones. Because you can imagine if you deal with a multi-time zone setup, the exact calculation that we use right here will probably not work in the same way because they're anyway spread out through different time zones. So what you would do is you would probably set operating hours to 24 hours and you start calculating with this. Now, this also depends on where your customer base is, how many percentage of them, for example, in the same country, how many of them are outside, etc. This is something you need to put into the equation and make sure you understand this, because this definitely has an impact for your call concurrency. If you are really not sure at all, try to just use the calculator right here. You get a better idea and you can just try it out. And if you still get blocked numbers, you will see this in your logs and you can react accordingly. Now, the next thing is virality, which also goes together with just getting a bunch of calls at the exact same time. Let's, for example, say you're a social media influencer and you make a post and this post goes viral and you actually have a voice AI in place that just helps you convert people into your paid course or whatever you sell. Even in this case, it might happen that you run out of those concurrent calls. And in this case, I can give you another tip. What we do is, and what you can do with Vapi is, you can just purchase those concurrent lines on a monthly basis. Doesn't mean you have a full year of commitment, right? You just purchase them on a monthly basis, meaning that if you already know you're gonna have a massive amount of calls coming in, simply increase them on a monthly basis and you can decrease them after, and you only pay it for the time that you actually use it. Now, the next one is call cadence. As you can imagine, it is usually that we try to call a user for some campaigns multiple times, meaning if they don't pick up today, we try the same thing again tomorrow, which is often the case as well for service-based businesses. If you, for example, have cleaners coming over, we call them a day before, maybe 2 days before, and make sure that they know that they are there or that they move vehicles, whatever the goal is of cleaning in that case. So you also have recurring calls that you also need to implement and make sure you cover properly when you do those call concurrency limits. Because those calculations I showed you now is for a single assistant that only does those kind of calls. So making sure you cover cadence is also very crucial. And lastly are the callbacks, which I kind of mentioned in the beginning, but it's just really important that you understand that often, or sometimes even if you don't have any campaign running, you always want to reserve some specific or some lines so that people can call back even though they are not directly in your campaign. Let's say you have a customer support setup, right? Let's say you do outbound campaigns. You never exactly know when they will call back. It might be now, it might be that 20 people call at the same time in like 3 hours. This is always something that kind of depends a little bit on the setup and on your audience. So this is very variable. And the best thing is literally just to give it a try. However, the last thing I like to mention, literally the best thing you can do is just try it by yourself, using some formulas to just understand a little bit more of your unique situation. Or if you would like us to help you with this, we can definitely talk about that as well. You will always find our website in my description, so you can just head over to my YouTube page and just head over there and book a consultation, or maybe even just a discovery call. This is completely up to you. But that's all I got for you now. I really hope this helps you understand this whole concept of call concurrency limits. And if you have any questions, you're most welcome to drop them below in the comments. I'm reading through all of them. That's all I have for now. Thank you very much for watching. I appreciate your time and see you next time.